beautiful woman, a loveless marriage, and a betrayal in the heart of the desert. Left to die under the scorching sun, she is rescued by a powerful and mysterious king. But fate has even bigger plans for her. What happens when the past she tried to escape comes back, begging for mercy? Stay until the end to witness a story of love, revenge, and redemption that will leave you breathless. Tell me in the comments, where are you watching from? And why do you love these historical romance stories? The grand ballroom of the Al-Masri estate glittered with 1,000 candles, their light dancing across the ornate golden decorations that adorned every wall. Yet, despite the brilliance surrounding her, Nur Zahira felt only darkness in her heart. Today was her wedding day, but there was no joy to be found in the elaborate celebration. As she sat beside her new husband, Lord Karim Al-Masri, she could feel the cold distance between them, a chasm wider than the desert itself. "Smile, wife," Karim whispered through clenched teeth, his handsome face betraying no emotion to the guests who approached to offer congratulations. They expect to see happiness on such an occasion. Nur forced her lips to curve upward, though the smile never reached her eyes. At 36, she had long abandoned the girlish dreams of marrying for love. As the daughter of a respected spice merchant from Cairo, she understood that marriages were business arrangements, especially ones as advantageous as this. Her father had practically beamed with pride when Lord Al-Masri, one of the most influential nobles in the region, had expressed interest in an alliance through marriage. "Your beauty is matched only by the connections your family brings," Karim had told her father, not her, when the arrangement was finalized. Even then, Nur had noticed how his gaze skimmed over her, as if she were merely another possession to acquire. The wedding feast continued late into the night. Exotic dancers performed, while musicians played traditional Egyptian melodies that would normally stir the soul. Distinguished guests from across Cairo and Alexandria raised crystal glasses and toasts to the couple's future happiness. Through it all, Nur sat like a beautiful ornament, adorned in silks and jewels that felt heavier with each passing hour. When Karim finally rose to address their guests, he spoke eloquently of business opportunities and political alliances. Not once did he mention love, partnership, or even respect for his new bride. Nur felt her heart constrict painfully as she watched the man she was now bound to for life. His dark eyes, though striking, held no warmth when they occasionally glanced her way. "Come," he commanded later that night after the celebrations had ended and they retired to their private chambers. "Tomorrow begins early, and I have important matters to discuss with the British ambassador." Nur stood motionless as her handmaidens removed her elaborate wedding attire and prepared her for her wedding night. She had been told what to expect, had steeled herself for the intimacy that would seal their union. But Karim merely glanced at her dismissively before retreating to his own separate chambers, leaving Nur alone with her thoughts and a crushing sense of rejection on what should have been the most intimate night of her life. The weeks that followed established a pattern that would define their marriage. Karim treated Nur with cool indifference, acknowledging her presence only when social conventions demanded it. She took her meals alone most days, wandering the vast estate like a ghost, beautiful but unseen. The servants treated her with distant respect, but she could sense their pity. One evening, 2 months after their wedding, Karim hosted an elaborate dinner for his business associates. Nur had spent hours preparing, hoping that perhaps this time he might see her as more than an obligation. She wore a gown of deep crimson silk that complemented her olive skin and accentuated her graceful figure. "You look adequate," was Karim's only comment when she entered the dining hall. Throughout the evening, she attempted to engage in conversation, to show her intelligence and wit. She had been educated beyond what was typical for women of her status, and spoke fluently on topics ranging from literature to politics. Yet each time she offered an opinion, Karim would swiftly interrupt or change the subject, as if her voice were an unwelcome intrusion. "My wife finds these matters tedious," he explained to one guest who had seemed genuinely interested in her perspective on the changing trade routes through the Ottoman Empire. "Women's minds are better suited to household affairs, wouldn't you agree?" The guest, an older man with kind eyes, had merely nodded uncomfortably. Later, when Karim was occupied elsewhere, He had approached Noor privately. "Your husband does not recognize the treasure he possesses," he said quietly. "Intelligence in a beautiful woman is the rarest of combinations." Those words had sustained Noor for days afterward, a small kindness in a marriage devoid of affection. As summer faded into autumn, Noor found herself increasingly isolated. Karim traveled frequently, never inviting her to accompany him. When present, he treated her as little more than a servant, expecting perfection in the running of his household, but offering no acknowledgement when she succeeded. Then one crisp morning in late October, Karim summoned Noor to his study. She entered cautiously, noting the maps spread across his ornate desk and the trunks being packed by servants. "We leave tomorrow for the trading post in Sahara," he announced without preamble. "Pack lightly. The journey will be arduous." Shock rendered Noor momentarily speechless. In all their months of marriage, he had never included her in his business affairs. "You wish me to accompany you?" she finally asked, unable to hide her surprise. Karim's expression remained impassive. The sheikh who oversees the region is old-fashioned. He respects men who travel with their wives. Your presence will facilitate negotiations. Not a desire for her company then, but another business strategy. Still, Noor felt a flicker of hope. Perhaps away from the constraints of society, they might find some common ground, some basis for at least a respectful partnership, if not love. "I shall be ready," she promised, withdrawing from his presence before he could note the foolish hope that had brightened her eyes. That night, Noor prepared for the journey with care, selecting practical garments but also including a few items of beauty. The desert, she had heard, held its own magic, ancient and mysterious. Perhaps under its vast sky, hearts could change. Dawn had barely broken when they departed. Karim rode at the front of their small caravan, speaking in hushed tones with his most trusted guards. Noor traveled in a curtained litter, swaying rhythmically with the camel's stride. Through the thin fabric, she watched as the lush landscape of the Nile Valley gradually gave way to the unforgiving sands of the Sahara. By the third day, something in the atmosphere of their party had changed. The guards grew tense, exchanging glances when they thought no one was watching. That evening, as they made camp, Noor overheard fragments of whispered conversation. "Perfect location. No witnesses. The master's orders are clear." A chill that had nothing to do with the desert night crept over her skin. When Karim approached her tent later, his smile seemed different, predatory. "Rest well, wife," he said, his voice oddly solicitous. "Tomorrow will bring significant changes." As she lay sleepless on her bedroll, Noor's intuition screamed a warning that her rational mind refused to accept. Surely even a man as cold as Karim would not. She forced the thought away, but the terror remained, coiling in her stomach like a serpent preparing to strike. In the dead of night, Noor crept from her tent, intending to confront Karim, to demand the truth. But what she saw instead froze her blood. Her husband stood among his men, distributing coins and giving instructions. Their expressions left no doubt. Whatever was planned for tomorrow would mean her destruction. "Remember," she heard Karim say, "no trace must remain. The desert will be our ally in this." Trembling, Noor retreated to her tent. For the first time since her wedding day, she wept openly, tears of fear and betrayal soaking into her pillow. By dawn, she had dried her eyes and hardened her resolve. If death awaited her, she would face it with dignity. But knowledge did nothing to prepare her for the moment when Karim's true intentions were revealed. The merciless sun blazed overhead as their caravan halted in the vast emptiness of the Sahara. Not a single cloud offered relief from the scorching heat that seemed to press down upon them like a physical weight. Noor felt perspiration trickling down her spine as she peered through the curtains of her litter. There was nothing around them, no oasis, no landmark, no logical reason to stop in such an exposed location. "Why are we stopping, my lord?" Noor asked as Karim approached, his expression unreadable behind the scarf that protected his face from the biting sand. "The heat is most dangerous at this hour." "The horses need rest," he replied curtly, offering his hand to help her down. "Come, stretch your legs while you can." Something in his tone made Noor hesitate. But refusing would only arouse suspicion. With as much grace as she could muster, she allowed him to assist her from the litter, her feet sinking slightly into the soft sand. The guards stood at attention, their eyes averted but their postures tense with anticipation. "Walk with me," Karim commanded, guiding her away from the caravan. "Is it wise to venture far from the others?" Noor questioned, fighting to keep her voice steady. Karim's lips curved into what might have been a smile on another man, but on him it resembled the cold, calculating look of a predator. "Always so cautious, wife. One might think you don't trust your own husband." "Trust is earned, not demanded," Noor replied, summoning courage she didn't know she possessed. His grip on her arm tightened painfully. "A lesson you won't have time to learn." Before Noor could respond, a commotion erupted behind them. She turned to see several men in dark robes charging toward the caravan, their faces covered, brandishing curved daggers that glinted in the harsh sunlight. "Bandits!" one of the guards shouted, drawing his weapon in an elaborate performance. Karim gripped Noor's shoulders, his fingers digging into her flesh. "Such unfortunate timing," he said, his voice now stripped of all pretense. "It seems we've been ambushed." Noor watched the scene unfold with growing horror and clarity. The attackers moved with practiced coordination, yet none of Karim's men appeared genuinely surprised or frightened. The battle that ensued was nothing more than choreographed chaos. "What have you done?" she whispered, meeting Karim's eyes directly for perhaps the first time in their marriage. He didn't bother to deny it. "What's necessary? You've served your purpose, Noor. Your father's connections have been secured. Your dowry has been spent. Now you've become inconvenient. You would murder your own wife?" The words escaped her like a prayer, disbelieving despite the evidence before her. "Murder?" Karim feigned offense. "I would never stain my hands with such a dishonorable act. No, the desert will claim you. A tragic casualty of a bandit attack, a grieving widower I shall be." As his meaning became clear, true fear gripped Noor's heart. "Please, Karim, whatever I've done to displease you—" "Your existence displeases me," he interrupted coldly. "Did you think I married you for love? For your beauty?" He laughed, a harsh sound that cut through the desert air. "I married you for your father's trade routes, nothing more." The staged battle continued in the background, a perfect distraction for what was to come. Karim roughly pushed Noor to her knees, forcing her to look up at him one last time. "The desert is efficient," he said, almost academically. "No water, no shelter. Nature will erase what man cannot." "They will know," Noor warned, even as she recognized the futility of her words. "My father will receive news of your tragic death with appropriate evidence," Karim finished for her. "A torn garment, perhaps, stained with animal blood. The bandits responsible will never be found, despite my tireless efforts to bring them to justice." In that moment, looking into his emotionless eyes, Noor understood that her husband had never seen her as human. She was merely a transaction, completed and now to be discarded. With an almost gentle gesture, Karim removed a jeweled dagger from his belt and placed it in the sand beside her. "A small mercy," he explained. "Should you prefer a quicker end than thirst will provide." "Why not kill me yourself?" Noor challenged, her voice gaining strength even as her hope died. "Are you such a coward?" His expression hardened. "Careful, wife. I could make this far more unpleasant." "At least face me honestly, without this charade," she demanded, gesturing toward the fake battle. "Grant me that dignity." For a fleeting moment, something resembling respect flickered across Karim's features. "You've more spine than I credited you with. A pity it emerges too late." With that, he turned and walked away. No final word, no goodbye, just the cruel finality of his retreating back. Noor watched as he rejoined his men, giving a signal that instantly transformed the scripted chaos into ordered retreat. Within minutes, the entire caravan had mounted and begun to move away, leaving only swirling dust and Noor's solitary figure kneeling in the vast emptiness. "Karim!" she screamed after him, her voice quickly swallowed by the immensity of the desert. But he never looked back. As the sound of hoofbeats faded, replaced by the soft, constant whisper of sand shifting in the wind. Reality crashed upon Noor with devastating clarity. She was alone, without water, shelter, or direction, in one of the most hostile environments on Earth. The dagger beside her caught the sunlight, offering its deadly promise of escape. For one brief moment she considered it. Then, with a surge of defiance, she hurled it as far as her strength allowed, watching it disappear into the golden sea of sand. If she was to die, it would not be by her own hand, and not without fighting until her final breath. Rising unsteadily to her feet, Noor surveyed the endless horizon. Every direction looked identical, merciless, unforgiving. With a silent prayer to whatever gods might be listening, she chose a path and began to walk. The sun had begun its descent toward the horizon when a group of riders appeared like mirages across the undulating desert. Their dark silhouettes stood in stark contrast against the amber sky, moving with purpose and precision that spoke of intimate knowledge of the desert's treacherous terrain. At their head rode a commanding figure on a magnificent black stallion, King Rashid ibn Khalil, ruler of the hidden kingdom of Al-Jawhar. "My lord, there appears to be something ahead," called one of his scouts, pointing to a small, crumpled form half buried in the shifting sands. Rashid narrowed his eyes, raising a hand to signal his men to slow their approach. Years of ruling a kingdom hidden among the dunes had taught him caution. Bandits were known to use all manner of deception to lure travelers into ambush. "Circle wide," he commanded, his deep voice carrying authority that brooked no disobedience. "Approach from multiple sides." As they drew nearer, what had seemed a potential trap revealed itself as a woman's body, her fine garments now tattered and sand-stained, her face partially covered by the fabric she'd used as protection from the sun. Rashid dismounted with the fluid grace of a man who had spent his life in the saddle and approached cautiously. "Is she dead, sire?" asked his most trusted advisor, Malik, as he joined his king. Rashid knelt beside the woman's motionless form. Beneath the layers of sand and dirt, he could see she was uncommonly beautiful, with delicate features and skin that, though reddened by the sun's harsh touch, suggested refinement. Gently, he placed 2 fingers against her neck. "There is a pulse," he murmured, surprising himself with the relief that colored his words. Faint, but present. He carefully turned her onto her back, revealing more fully a face that, even in unconsciousness, carried a dignity that seemed incongruous with her desperate circumstance. "She is not dressed for the desert," Rashid observed, noting the quality of her clothing. "These are a noblewoman's garments. Perhaps taken by raiders and abandoned when she became a burden," suggested Malik. "Or something worse," Rashid replied, his expression darkening as he surveyed the empty desert around them. Years of ruling had taught him to recognize the darker facets of human nature. No random bandits would leave a woman of her apparent status without taking her jewels. Indeed, gold bangles still encircled her wrists, and elaborate earrings dangled from her ears. Moving with decisive care, Rashid lifted the unconscious woman into his arms. She weighed almost nothing, dehydration having claimed what little reserves her body might have possessed. "She needs water and shelter immediately," he declared. "We return to the palace." "Sire," Malik's voice carried concern, "we know nothing of this woman, bringing a stranger into the heart of Al-Jawhar. Would you have me leave her to die, Malik?" Rashid interrupted, his tone sharpening. "What manner of king would I be to abandon a helpless woman to the desert's mercy?" Malik bowed his head in acquiescence. "Of course not, my king. I merely counsel caution." "And caution we shall exercise," Rashid agreed, carrying the woman to his horse and mounting with her secured before him. But not at the expense of compassion. As they rode toward the hidden kingdom, Rashid found himself peculiarly aware of the woman's presence against his chest. It had been 5 years since his beloved wife Layla had passed, 5 years since he had allowed himself to feel anything beyond the necessary emotions required for ruling. Yet something about this mysterious woman stirred long-dormant protective instincts within him. The journey back to Al-Jawhar was swift, the king's party navigating the treacherous sands with practiced ease. As they crested the final dune, the hidden kingdom revealed itself like a jewel nestled within the desert's harsh embrace. The palace rose from the sands like a dream made solid, towers of rosy stone catching the last rays of sunset, waters of an ancient oasis reflecting the deepening blue of the evening sky. "Summon Jamila," Rashid ordered as they passed through the massive gates carved directly into the sandstone cliffs that protected his kingdom. "Have her prepare the eastern chamber and bring her medicines." Servants rushed to fulfill his commands, eyes widening at the sight of the unconscious woman in their king's protective hold. Whispers immediately began to circulate through the palace. The reclusive King Rashid had brought a woman to the palace, a beautiful stranger rescued from the desert. Within the hour, Noor had been placed in a sumptuous bed in the palace's eastern wing, attended by Jamila, the kingdom's most skilled healer. The older woman worked methodically, bathing Noor's sun-scorched skin with cool cloths infused with healing herbs, carefully administering droplets of water to parched lips. "Will she live?" Rashid asked from the doorway, his tall frame silhouetted against the corridor's torchlight. Jamila looked up, her wise eyes assessing her king as thoroughly as she had assessed her patient. "If she survives the night, yes. She is stronger than she appears. Another hour in the desert would have claimed most lives." Rashid nodded, his gaze lingering on the woman's face, peaceful now in unconsciousness. "Send word when she wakes. I would speak with her." "And if she does not wake, my king?" Jamila asked gently. "Then we shall have done all that honor demands," he answered, his voice betraying nothing of the odd connection he felt to this stranger. "And she will be buried with the respect befitting a guest of the palace." For 3 days and nights, Noor remained unconscious, hovering in the delicate balance between life and death. Jamila never left her side, and Rashid found himself visiting the eastern chamber with increasing frequency, ostensibly to check on the stranger's progress, but driven by something deeper he refused to acknowledge. On the dawn of the 4th day, as earliest light filtered through the intricate lattice windows, Noor's eyelids fluttered open. Confusion clouded her gaze as she took in the unfamiliar surroundings, the high domed ceiling painted with stars, the silken bedding beneath her, the cool air scented with jasmine and myrrh. "Where?" she began, her voice a rasp, barely audible in the quiet chamber. "You are safe, my lady," came Jamila's gentle response as she moved to Noor's bedside with a cup of water. "You are in the palace of King Rashid ibn Khalil, sovereign of Al-Jawhar, the hidden kingdom." Word of the mysterious woman's awakening reached King Rashid as he sat in council with his advisors. Though he maintained his composed exterior, something indefinable flickered in his eyes at the news. With a measured gesture, he dismissed the gathering, ignoring the knowing glance exchanged between his older counselors. "The desert bloom finally opens," remarked Malik as they departed, his metaphor not lost on the king. The eastern wing of the palace felt different as Rashid approached it that afternoon, somehow lighter, as if the woman's consciousness had breathed new life into its ancient stones. He paused outside her chamber, straightening his royal robes and touching the simple gold circlet that denoted his station, a rare concession to vanity that surprised even himself. When he entered, Noor was sitting up against an arrangement of silk pillows, her dark hair falling in waves around shoulders now draped in a simple gown of pale blue. The color suited her, bringing out the remarkable amber flecks in her otherwise dark eyes. Those eyes widened slightly as she took in his regal appearance, and she attempted to bow her head in deference. "Please," Rashid said, his deep voice gentler than his courtiers would have recognized. "Save your strength. Formalities matter little when one has faced death so recently." "I owe you my life, Your Majesty," Noor replied, her voice still raw from days without water. "Formality seems the least I can offer in return." A smile, rare and genuine, touched Rashid's lips. "You have spirit, my lady, to think of protocol after such an ordeal." "Spirit is sometimes all we have left," she answered softly, meeting his gaze with a directness that most would not dare with the sovereign of Al-Jawhar. Rashid moved to sit in a carved chair beside her bed, his tall frame somehow making the substantial furniture appear insufficient. "Jamila tells me you are recovering well, but that you have shared little of how you came to be alone in the desert." Noor's gaze dropped to her hands, where they clutched the silken coverlet. "It is not a tale that brings honor to those involved." "Then perhaps it is one that should be told," Rashid countered, "so that justice might be considered." A bitter smile crossed Noor's face. "Justice? Is there justice for a wife discarded like unwanted baggage when her usefulness ends?" Understanding dawned in Rashid's eyes. "Your husband abandoned you." "After arranging a false bandit attack to provide convenient explanation for my disappearance," Noor confirmed, her voice strengthening with each word, as if speaking the truth aloud restored something vital within her. "Lord Karim al-Masri decided that having secured my father's trade routes through our marriage, my continued existence had become inconvenient." Rashid's expression darkened, a glimpse of the fierce ruler who had united the desert tribes and carved a kingdom from the unforgiving sands. "This man left you to die." "With impressive efficiency," Noor agreed, a flash of gallows humor surprising them both. "He even provided a dagger should I prefer a quicker end than thirst." "And yet you live," Rashid observed, studying her with newfound respect. "Not by particular design or skill," she admitted. "I simply refuse to die on his terms." Silence fell between them, comfortable in a way that seemed impossible for two strangers. Through the latticed windows, the afternoon light cast geometric patterns across the marble floor, shifting like the sands that had nearly claimed her life. "What is your name?" Rashid finally asked, realizing the fundamental question had been overlooked. "Noor Zahira," she replied, "though I suppose widow of Karim al-Masri would now be more accurate, at least in the world's eyes." "And what would you prefer to be called?" The question startled her. In her 36 years, few had ever asked her preference about anything, let alone something as fundamental as her identity. "Just Noor," she answered after a moment's consideration. "Perhaps it is time I defined myself by my own name rather than my relation to others." Rashid nodded, as if she had passed some unspoken test. "Then Noor you shall be in Al-Jawhar. Once you have recovered your strength, you may decide your path forward. Until then, you are an honored guest in my palace." "You are generous to a stranger," Noor observed cautiously. Something like pain crossed Rashid's features, so quickly she might have imagined it. "I know something of loss, Noor. 5 years ago, my wife Layla died bringing our child into this world. Neither survived." His voice remained steady, but the old grief was evident in the slight tension of his shoulders. "Since then, I have perhaps become too accustomed to solitude." "I am sorry," Noor said simply. "There are no adequate words for such loss." "No," he agreed. "There are not. But life continues, whether we wish it or not." As if sensing the conversation had ventured into territory too intimate for a first meeting, Rashid rose. "Rest. Recover. Al-Jawhar is hidden from the outside world for good reason. Here you need fear no pursuit from your past." Over the following weeks, as Noor's strength returned, she began to explore the wonders of the hidden palace. Unlike the cold opulence of Karim's estate, Rashid's home felt alive, a seamless blend of natural beauty and human craftsmanship. Gardens flourished improbably in the desert clime, fed by ancient springs that bubbled up from deep beneath the sands. Fountains cooled the air in courtyards where scholars gathered to discuss philosophy and poetry. Contrary to the whispers of a reclusive, bitter king, Noor observed Rashid moving among his people with quiet authority and unexpected kindness. He knew the names of servants, listened intently to the concerns of merchants, and played chess with elderly veterans of battles long past. Yet there remained about him an aura of isolation, as if part of him lived behind an invisible wall. On an evening when the desert skies blazed with stars, Noor found herself wandering into a secluded garden she had not yet discovered. There, seated on a stone bench beneath a flowering tree, was Rashid, without his crown, dressed in simpler robes than his usual royal attire. "Forgive me," she said, turning to leave. "I did not mean to intrude on your privacy." "Stay," he said, the word somewhere between command and request. "The night is too beautiful to appreciate alone." Hesitantly, Noor joined him on the bench, careful to maintain a respectful distance. The night air carried the scent of night-blooming jasmine, and somewhere in the darkness, a nightingale sang its lonely song. "Do you find Al-Jawhar to your liking?" Rashid asked after a comfortable silence. "It is like no place I have ever known," Noor answered honestly, "a paradise hidden within harshness." "Much like hope concealed within despair," Rashid observed. "One must know where to look." The palace of Al-Jawhar hummed with unusual energy as servants hurried through corridors, carrying armfuls of flowers and fine silks. Tonight marked the Festival of Stars, an ancient celebration when the desert kingdom honored the celestial guides that had led their ancestors through the treacherous sands centuries ago. For the first time in 5 years, King Rashid had ordered the full grandeur of the traditional festivities restored. Noor stood before a polished silver mirror in her chambers, barely recognizing the woman who gazed back at her. The simple gowns she had worn during her convalescence had been replaced by a creation of golden silk that caught the light with each movement, its delicate embroidery depicting constellations across the bodice. Her dark hair, arranged in elaborate braids interwoven with tiny pearls, framed a face transformed not just by cosmetics, but by the gradual return of life to her spirit. A soft knock interrupted her contemplation. "Enter," she called, expecting her handmaiden with final adjustments for the evening. Instead, Rashid himself stood in the doorway, momentarily struck silent at the vision before him. He carried a long, narrow box of polished cedar. "Your Majesty," Noor breathed, instinctively lowering her eyes. "I did not expect—" "Rashid," he corrected gently. "Tonight is a celebration, not a court function. I would hear my name from those I consider friends." The intimacy of his request warmed her cheeks. "Rashid," she repeated, the name feeling both foreign and familiar on her lips. He approached, his customary regal bearing softened by something she couldn't quite define. "I've brought you something," he said, opening the box to reveal a necklace of sapphires set in intricate gold filigree. "It belonged to my mother. The blue reminded me of how you looked when you first opened your eyes after the desert nearly claimed you." "I couldn't possibly accept," Noor began, overwhelmed by the significance of such a gift. "You can," he interrupted with gentle firmness. "And you will. Consider it not just a gift from me, but from Al-Jawhar itself, a welcome to one who has faced its harshest test and emerged stronger." With careful movements, Rashid lifted the necklace and stepped behind her. Noor felt his presence like warmth from a fire, comforting yet dangerous in its intensity. His fingers brushed the nape of her neck as he fastened the clasp, and she could not suppress a slight shiver at the contact. "There," he said, his voice lower than before. "Now you truly look like you belong among the stars we celebrate tonight." Noor turned to face him, suddenly aware of how close they stood. "Thank you," she said simply, knowing that elaborate expressions of gratitude would diminish the moment rather than enhance it. Rashid's dark eyes studied her face with an intensity that should have made her uncomfortable, but instead filled her with an unexpected sense of security. "When I found you in the desert," he said quietly, "I never imagined you would become—" "Become what?" Noor prompted when he did not continue. The king seemed to catch himself, as if suddenly aware he had ventured toward dangerous territory. "A valued presence in my kingdom," he finished, taking a step back and resuming his more formal demeanor. "The festivities will begin soon. May I escort you to the Grand Hall?" The celebration exceeded anything Noor could have imagined. The enormous central courtyard had been transformed into an enchanted space where hundreds of lanterns floated overhead like captured stars. Musicians played instruments she had never seen before, producing melodies that seemed to weave spells through the evening air. Acrobats performed impossible feats among silk ribbons suspended from the high ceilings, while tables laden with exotic delicacies lined the perimeter. As she entered on Rashid's arm, conversations paused and heads turned. Though Noor had grown accustomed to being observed during her months in the palace, tonight felt different. She was no longer just the mysterious woman rescued from the desert, but a guest of honor at the king's side. "They stare," she whispered to Rashid. "Of course they do," he replied, a rare smile lightening his features. "Beauty always commands attention." The evening progressed through elaborate rituals honoring the desert and sky. Poets recited verses about the stars guiding lost travelers home, while dancers interpreted the eternal dance of celestial bodies. Throughout it all, Rashid remained close to Noor, quietly explaining traditions and introducing her to nobles and scholars whose curiosity about her was barely concealed beneath courtly manners. As midnight approached, the music shifted to a hauntingly beautiful melody played on a single-stringed instrument. The crowd parted, creating an open space in the center of the courtyard. "This is the celestial dance," Rashid explained. "Tradition holds that the king must choose a partner to represent the meeting of earth and sky." Before Noor could respond, he extended his hand to her. A collective murmur rippled through the assembly. Not since Queen Layla had the king danced with anyone. "I don't know the steps," Noor protested softly. "Neither do I anymore," Rashid admitted. "Perhaps we can remember together." Heart racing, Noor placed her hand in his and allowed him to lead her to the center of the courtyard. The music intensified as Rashid placed one hand at her waist, holding her other hand aloft. With the first step, something extraordinary happened. The years of formal separation between them seemed to dissolve, replaced by a connection that felt ancient and new all at once. They moved together as if they had danced 1,000 times before, their bodies finding a natural harmony that defied their brief acquaintance. Rashid's usual reserve melted away, replaced by a grace and presence that reminded everyone present that he was not merely a serious ruler, but a man in his prime. And Noor, who had spent years diminishing herself to accommodate Karim's indifference, found herself expanding into the space Rashid created for her, her movements becoming more confident with each turn. As they spun beneath the canopy of lanterns, their eyes locked in a gaze too intimate for public display, yet impossible to break. For those precious moments, the rest of the world faded away, leaving only the music, the movement, and the magnetic pull between them. When the final notes faded, they remained motionless, still holding each other, their breathing synchronized. The spell broke only when the courtyard erupted in applause, startling them back to awareness of their surroundings. Rashid released her slowly, as if reluctant to break contact. "You dance beautifully," he said, his voice husky. "As do you," she replied, suddenly shy beneath the intensity of his gaze. The remainder of the evening passed in a blur of sensations. The continued music, the taste of sweet wine, the feeling of Rashid's eyes following her whenever they were separated. Something fundamental had shifted between them, something neither was prepared to name but both recognized as potentially life-changing. As the celebration finally wound down in the early hours of the morning, a breathless messenger interrupted the festivities, approaching Rashid with urgency. Whatever news he delivered caused the king's expression to harden instantly, the warmth Noor had witnessed all evening vanishing beneath the mask of royal duty. "What is it?" she asked when he returned to her side. "War approaches our borders," Rashid replied grimly. "A desperate man seeks audience at first light, claiming his territory faces annihilation. He begs for Al-Jawhar's protection and military might. You will help him?" Noor questioned, troubled by the sudden transformation in his demeanor. "I will hear him," Rashid corrected, "though I am inclined to skepticism. Few outsiders know of Al-Jawhar's existence, and those who do rarely come with honest intentions." A chill premonition crept along Noor's spine, though she could not have explained its source. "This man who comes seeking aid, did the messenger mention his name?" Rashid's eyes met hers, and in them she saw confirmation of her unspoken fear. "Yes," he said quietly. "Lord Karim al-Masri." De Salão Real silencia quando Karim, de joelhos, implora por ajuda ao poderoso rei Rashid. Seus olhos carregam desespero, mas ele ainda não percebe que Noor está ali, viva e protegida pelo homem a quem ele agora suplica. Noor observa a cena de longe, seu coração acelerado, tomada por uma mistura de raiva e incredulidade. O homem que tentou destruí-la agora implora misericórdia. Rashid percebe a tensão no olhar de Noor e entende que há algo muito mais profundo acontecendo ali. Quando Karim finalmente ergue os olhos e a vê, Seu rosto empalidece como se tivesse visto um fantasma. O choque o faz recuar, e ele murmura seu nome, incrédulo. Nur não desvia o olhar, mantendo-se firme diante do homem que a abandonou para morrer. Agora, ela tem o poder de decidir seu destino. Sem revelar sua identidade à corte, Rashid pede a Nur que se retire para que ele possa avaliar a situação. Ele precisa entender se Karim realmente está em perigo ou se há algo mais por trás de sua súplica. Mas no fundo, Rashid já sabe que qualquer decisão será tomada não apenas como rei, mas como homem apaixonado. Tentar novamente RP. Prossiga e desenvolva o capítulo 7 seguindo todas as diretrizes, lembrando que eu vou mandar refazer até ficar com aproximadamente 4.500 caracteres. Dica: aprofunde os diálogos entre os personagens, mas sem exagerar para não ficar parecendo enrolação. Saiba a hora de parar e tudo dará certo. Isso é muito importante. Siga isso com precisão. Editar. Desculpe. Parece que o capítulo 6 foi iniciado em português em vez de inglês. Vamos corrigir isso e continuar com o capítulo 6 adequadamente em inglês dos Estados Unidos e depois prosseguir para o capítulo 7. The grand audience chamber of Al-Jawhar fell silent as Karim, on his knees, begged for help from the powerful King Rashid. His eyes carried desperation, but he had not yet noticed that Nur was there, alive and protected by the man before whom he now pleaded. Nur observed the scene from behind an ornately latticed screen, traditionally reserved for women of the court to observe proceedings without being seen, her heart pounding so violently she feared it might betray her presence. Despite Rashid's insistence that she need not subject herself to this encounter, she had been adamant. She needed to see Karim's face again, to prove to herself that he no longer held power over her. Lord Karim al-Masri entered with his head bowed in the appropriate gesture of deference, though Nur recognized the calculated nature of his humility. He had lost weight since she had last seen him, and his once immaculate attire showed signs of hasty travel. Still, even in apparent desperation, he maintained the bearing of a man accustomed to authority. "Rise and state your business," Rashid commanded, his voice resonating through the chamber with the practiced authority of a ruler secure in his power. Karim raised his head, and Nur felt a jolt of satisfaction at the exhaustion evident in his features. "Your Majesty, I come seeking the legendary mercy and might of King Rashid ibn Khalil." His voice, once so assured, now carried a tremor. "My lands face invasion from the northern tribes. My people suffer. I have heard whispers that the kingdom of Al-Jawhar possesses warriors unmatched in courage and skill." "Curious," Rashid replied, leaning forward slightly, "that you should know of a kingdom most believed to be merely a desert myth." A flicker of uncertainty crossed Karim's face. "Desperate men seek truth in legends, Your Majesty. I followed rumors, ancient maps, the guidance of a hermit who claimed to have once served in your court. And what do you offer in exchange for the protection you seek?" Rashid's tone remained neutral, giving away nothing of his thoughts. Karim spread his hands in a gesture of openness. "My remaining wealth, my loyalty, my territories once they are reclaimed, all would be at your disposal." "Generous offers from a man who appears to have little left to give," Rashid observed. "I had much more until recently," Karim responded, a flash of his old arrogance surfacing. "My position was secure until tragedy befell me. My wife—" He paused, seemingly overcome with emotion that Nur knew to be entirely fabricated. "My beloved wife was lost in a bandit attack while we traveled. The diplomatic alliances her family provided collapsed with her death. Rivals seized the opportunity to move against me." Behind her screen, Nur pressed a hand to her mouth to stifle a sound of outrage at this blatant rewriting of history. The guards stationed nearby glanced in her direction, but maintained their disciplined silence. "A tragic tale," Rashid commented, his expression unreadable. "You must have cared deeply for your wife." "She was everything to me," Karim declared, his performance so convincing that had Nur not lived the truth, she might almost have believed him. "Her loss has haunted my every moment since." "And these bandits," Rashid continued, rising from his throne to descend the shallow steps toward Karim. "Did you pursue them? Seek justice for your beloved wife?" Karim lowered his eyes in what appeared to be grief. With every resource at my command, Your Majesty. But the desert claimed them as it claimed her. No trace remained. How convenient, Rashid murmured, circling Karim slowly, like a desert lion assessing its prey. The desert is indeed efficient at erasing what man cannot. Karim's head snapped up, his eyes widening at the familiar phrase, his own words to Noor before abandoning her. I don't understand your meaning, sire. Don't you? Rashid stopped his circling, standing directly before the increasingly uneasy nobleman. I find it curious that you come to me with tales of a wife lost to bandits, when no reports of such an attack reached even my extensive network of informants. We were traveling in the deep desert, Karim protested, sweat now visible on his brow despite the chamber's cool temperature, far from established routes. More curious still, Rashid continued as if Karim hadn't spoken, that you should mourn so convincingly a wife you left to die in that same desert. Complete silence fell over the chamber. Even the guards, trained to maintain impassivity, exchanged quick glances of surprise. I don't know what lies you've been told, Karim began, desperation creeping into his voice, but I assure you— Silence, Rashid commanded, and such was the authority in his voice that Karim immediately fell quiet. I require no assurances from a man who would murder his own wife for convenience. Karim paled visibly. These are outrageous accusations. Who has poisoned your mind against me before I even arrived? Rashid studied him for a long moment. Perhaps you should ask her yourself. With a subtle gesture from the king, the palace guards moved to open the latticed screen. Noor stepped forward, her heart racing, but her steps steady as she emerged into the chamber's full light. She wore not the golden gown of the previous night's festivities, but a simpler dress of deep blue silk, adorned only with Rashid's gift, the sapphire necklace that seemed to capture the essence of her eyes. Karim staggered backward as if physically struck. Noor, he whispered, her name falling from his lips like a confession. It cannot be. Yet it is, she replied, her voice stronger than she had anticipated. The desert did not claim me, Karim, though not for lack of your efforts. As Karim's desperate pleas echoed through the audience chamber, Rashid gestured to his guards. Escort Lord Al-Masri to the guest quarters in the western wing. He will remain there until we determine his fate. His voice carried the unmistakable authority of final judgment. The guards moved swiftly, flanking Karim on either side. Before they could lead him away, he fixed his gaze on Noor, his expression a complex mixture of rage, disbelief, and calculation. This is not finished between us, he said, his voice low enough that only she and Rashid could hear. You are still my wife under law. Take him away, Rashid commanded, his patience clearly exhausted. As Karim was led from the chamber, the assembled court began to disperse, murmuring among themselves about the extraordinary scene they had witnessed. Noor remained motionless, her composure maintained only through supreme effort. Now that the confrontation was over, she felt suddenly hollow, as if the anger that had sustained her had evaporated, leaving nothing in its wake. Come, Rashid said gently, offering his arm to her. You should rest. She placed her hand on his forearm, grateful for the solid strength he offered. Not rest, she replied. I've spent too long in passive waiting. I need air and movement. Understanding, Rashid guided her not to her chambers, but to the private royal gardens where they had first begun to truly speak to one another. As they walked in silence beneath the flowering trees, Noor felt her breathing gradually steady and her thoughts clarify. He still believes he has power over me, she finally said, stopping beside a small reflection pool where golden fish darted among lily pads. He has none, Rashid assured her. Not within my kingdom. Noor turned to face him, searching his expression. What will you do with him? That depends greatly on what you wish done, Rashid answered, surprising her. It is your justice to claim. The weight of this responsibility settled on her shoulders. I never thought to have such power over his fate. A strange reversal, is it not? The man who discarded you as worthless now depends entirely on your mercy. Rashid's voice held no mockery, only a quiet acknowledgement of life's unpredictable turns. What would you do if the decision were yours alone? Noor asked. A shadow passed over Rashid's features. If it were my decision alone, he would not see another sunrise. The cold certainty in his voice sent a shiver through her. No man who could abandon his wife to such a fate deserves to draw breath in my kingdom. Yet you stayed your hand. Because vengeance, however justified, rarely brings the peace we imagine it will. Rashid's expression softened as he looked at her. And because a queen should determine her own justice, the word hung between them. Queen. Not spoken as an official title, but as a recognition of her dignity, her right to decide her own destiny. I am no queen, Noor whispered. Are you not? Rashid stepped closer, close enough that she could feel the warmth of him in the cool garden air. You carry yourself with more nobility than most who are born to the title. Before she could respond, a servant approached, bowing deeply. Forgive the interruption, Your Majesty. Lord Al-Masri demands an audience. He claims to have information vital to the kingdom's security. Rashid's expression hardened. He demands nothing in my palace. Yet if his information is genuine, Noor began. Then we shall hear it together, Rashid decided. I'll not leave you to face him alone again, nor will I meet with him without your presence. Whatever game he plays, we will confront it united. The western guest chamber was luxurious by any standard, though Noor noted with grim satisfaction that the windows were too narrow for escape and guards stood posted at the door. Karim had composed himself since their earlier encounter, his expression carefully controlled as they entered. You honor me with your presence, Your Majesty, he said with a formal bow to Rashid. His eyes flickered briefly to Noor before returning to the king, and my wife as well. Former wife, Rashid corrected coldly. Your actions in the desert dissolved any bond between you. The law recognizes no such dissolution, Karim countered smoothly. But that is a matter for another time. I requested this audience because there are facts you should know before making any hasty decisions regarding my request for aid. Speak plainly, Rashid commanded. My patience with your games grows thin. Karim smiled thinly. Not games, Your Majesty. Strategy. The northern invaders who threaten my territory do not intend to stop with my lands. They seek the legendary riches of Al-Jawhar itself. Many have sought Al-Jawhar over the centuries, Rashid replied dismissively. All have failed to find what lies hidden in plain sight. Because they lacked proper guidance, Karim countered. But times change. The leader of this invasion force possesses ancient maps, detailed knowledge of the desert's secrets. Knowledge that until recently, I helped conceal. Noor observed the subtle tension that entered Rashid's posture. You claim to have protected Al-Jawhar's secrets? For years, Karim affirmed. My territories form a buffer between your hidden kingdom and the northern realms. Travelers with too much curiosity about desert legends found themselves discouraged when passing through my lands. Yet now you conveniently reveal our existence when it serves your desperate need, Rashid noted skeptically. Karim spread his hands in a gesture of pragmatic acceptance. Self-interest has always guided my actions. I won't deny it. But our interests align in this matter. If my lands fall, Al-Jawhar will soon follow. The invaders have technology and weapons your kingdom has never encountered. So you claim, Noor interjected, speaking for the first time since entering the chamber. Yet your words have proven worthless before. Karim's gaze hardened as he looked at her. Judge me as you will, Noor, but do not let your personal grievances endanger an entire kingdom. Ask yourself, what do I gain by fabricating this threat? Time, she answered immediately. Leverage, a reprieve from judgment. A flash of admiration crossed Karim's face before he could suppress it. You've grown sharper in your time here, but consider the risk I would take in lying about something so easily disproven. When the invasion force arrives at your borders, and they will arrive, any deception would be revealed. The chamber fell silent after Rashid's rebuke. Karim's jaw tightened visibly as he struggled to maintain his composure, unaccustomed to being spoken to with such authority. He inclined his head in a shallow bow toward Noor, the gesture as empty of respect as his words. "My apologies, Lady Noor," he said, his voice a steady and controlled resentment. "Old habits are difficult to break." "As are old deceits," she replied steadily. "You still haven't answered His Majesty's question. How did these invaders discover Al-Jawhar's location if you claim to have protected its secret?" Karim's gaze shifted between them, clearly weighing his options. Finally, he sighed with calculated resignation. "There was a map, an ancient one, passed down through my family for generations. It showed not just territories known to the outside world, but hidden landmarks that point the way to Al-Jawhar." "And you kept this map," Rashid concluded, his expression hardening, "despite knowing what it contained." "Knowledge is power, Your Majesty," Karim replied unapologetically. "I never intended to use it against you." "No," Noor interjected, understanding dawning with sickening clarity. "You kept it as insurance, a final resource to be exploited when all else failed." Karim didn't deny it. "The map is now in their possession. When I refused their demands for alliance, they seized my ancestral home. The map was hidden in a secret compartment that I believed undetectable. Yet they found it," Rashid observed coldly. "They had help," Karim admitted, his voice dropping. "My own advisor betrayed me. Hafiz had served my family for decades. I never imagined he harbored such resentment." Noor could not suppress a bitter laugh. "It seems you inspire remarkable loyalty in those closest to you, Karim." His eyes flashed with momentary fury before he mastered himself. "Mock if you wish, but the threat remains real. They will find Al-Jawhar, and when they do, they bring weapons your guards have never faced. Firearms from the northern kingdoms, cannons that can reduce your walls to rubble from a distance." Rashid remained impassive, but Noor noticed the subtle tension in his shoulders. "If what you say is true," he said after a measured pause, "why should I trust the architect of this disaster to help solve it?" "Because I know their strategies, their weaknesses," Karim replied immediately, "and because I have nothing left to lose. My lands are taken, my wealth depleted, my reputation in ruins. Redemption is all that remains possible for me." "Redemption," Noor repeated, the word bitter on her tongue. "You speak of it as if it were a garment one could simply don when convenient." "Perhaps it is," Karim countered, his gaze locking with hers. "Perhaps redemption is a choice one makes when faced with the consequences of past actions. Even you, Noor, must acknowledge that people can change when circumstances force them to see clearly." "And have you seen clearly?" she challenged. "Or merely adjusted your strategy to survive, as you've always done?" The question hung between them, charged with years of deception and pain. To Noor's surprise, something like genuine emotion flickered across Karim's features. "I don't know," he answered, his voice quieter than before. "But I know that leaving you in the desert was—" He paused, seemingly searching for words that didn't come naturally to him. "It was unforgivable. I don't expect your forgiveness. I do ask for the chance to prevent more death." Rashid, who had been observing this exchange with careful attention, finally spoke. "You will remain under guard while I verify what elements of your story can be confirmed. My scouts will be dispatched immediately to assess this alleged invasion force." "There isn't time," Karim began urgently. "There is precisely the time I determined there to be," Rashid interrupted with finality. "Until then, you will be treated as befits a guest who has not yet proven himself an ally or an enemy." With that, he gestured to Noor, and they departed, leaving Karim alone with his guards. As they walked through the corridors of the palace, neither spoke until they reached Rashid's private council chamber, where maps of the surrounding territories covered one wall. "You don't trust him," Noor observed as Rashid studied the maps intently. "Not for a moment," he confirmed, his eyes never leaving the carefully drawn boundaries and landmarks. "But neither can I dismiss his warning entirely. If there is even a small chance that Al-Jawhar faces genuine threat, I must prepare." Noor moved to stand beside him, her gaze following his across the maps. "What will you do if his warning proves true?" "Defend my people as I have always done." Rashid's voice softened as he finally turned to look at her. "The question that weighs more heavily on my mind is what you will do." "What do you mean?" she asked, though she suspected she knew exactly what he was asking. "Karim claims you are still legally his wife," Rashid said carefully, as if each word might shatter something fragile between them. "In the eyes of the outside world, this may be true. If his territories are restored through our intervention, he could demand your return." The thought sent a chill through Noor's body. "I would rather return to the desert than to him." "It will not come to that," Rashid promised, his hand finding hers in a gesture that seemed to surprise them both. "But we must consider how to permanently sever your connection to him. Your freedom must be secured beyond any legal challenge." The warmth of his hand around hers provided more comfort than Noor had expected. "What options exist? Divorce is nearly impossible for a woman to obtain, and Karim would never willingly release me, especially now that he knows I'm alive and under your protection. There are ancient laws in Al-Jawhar that supersede those of the outside world," Rashid explained. "As king, I have authority to dissolve any marriage when one party has committed an act that violates our most sacred principles. Attempted murder certainly qualifies." Hope flickered within Noor. "You would do this for me?" "I would do far more," Rashid admitted, his voice lowering as he took both her hands in his. "These past months, watching you rebuild yourself from the broken woman we found in the desert. Noor, you must know what you have come to mean to me." The intensity in his eyes made her breath catch. This man, this king who ruled with such strength and wisdom, was laying his heart bare before her. After years of Karim's cold manipulation, the honest vulnerability in Rashid's gaze was almost too much to bear. "I feared I would never feel anything again after Layla died," he continued when she remained silent. "I believed that part of me was buried with her and our child. Then you arrived, and slowly, day by day, you awakened something I thought lost forever." "Rashid," Noor whispered, her own emotions threatening to overwhelm her. "I cannot replace what you've lost." "I would never ask you to," he assured her firmly. "What I feel for you is not a replacement for past love, but something entirely new. You are not Layla, nor should you be. You are Noor, survivor, fighter, the woman who brought light back into my life when I had resigned myself to darkness." Before she could respond, a sharp knock interrupted them. The captain of Rashid's personal guard entered, his expression grave. "Forgive the intrusion, Your Majesty, but the scouts have returned. Lord Al-Masri's warning appears to be legitimate. A large force approaches from the north, heavily armed and moving with purpose directly toward the hidden paths to Al-Jawhar." The War Council of Al-Jawhar assembled with urgent haste in the strategic chamber deep within the palace. Maps and tactical diagrams covered the massive table of polished ironwood around which Rashid's most trusted advisors now gathered. The air hummed with tension as each commander reported on their preparations, their voices measured but unable to completely mask their concern. Noor stood quietly at Rashid's side, her presence raising a few subtly arched eyebrows among the older generals who had never seen a woman attend such meetings. Yet none dared question the king's decision to include her, especially after the scoutmaster addressed her directly. "The invaders follow the exact route Lord Al-Masri described," the weathered desert scout explained, tracing a line across the eastern map with his finger. "They move with the precision of men who know exactly where they're going, not explorers searching blindly." "How many?" Rashid asked, his voice calm despite the gravity of the situation. "At least 500 warriors, heavily armed with weapons from the northern lands. They have siege engines disassembled on camelback. They can be rebuilt within hours once they reach our outer defenses." Malik, Rashid's oldest advisor, stroked his silver beard thoughtfully. 500 is not an insurmountable number. Our warriors are better trained, and we hold the advantage of familiar terrain. "But not the advantage of superior weaponry," countered a younger commander named Isam. "These firearms the scouts describe, they can kill from distances our archers cannot match." As the debate continued, Noor studied the maps intently. Having spent months exploring every corner of the palace and questioning the historians about Al-Jawhar's past, she noticed something the others had overlooked. "This pathway," she said, her finger indicating a narrow pass through the eastern ridge. "The library records mention it was sealed after a sandstorm a century ago." The room fell silent as all eyes turned to her. The old Eastern approach, Malik confirmed, surprise evident in his voice. But as Lady Noor says, it was abandoned generations ago. Could the invaders know of it? Rashid asked, his gaze meeting Noor's with newfound intensity. If they possess ancient maps, as Karim claims, she replied, perhaps, but they would expect it to remain sealed. A slow smile spread across Rashid's face, not of amusement, but of strategic appreciation, which creates an opportunity. We could position forces there, unseen until the perfect moment. A flanking maneuver, Issam agreed, excitement building in his voice. Strike them from an angle they believe protected by nature itself. As the commanders began enthusiastically revising their battle plans around this new insight, a guard entered and approached Rashid, speaking in a low voice. The king's expression darkened momentarily before he addressed the council. Lord Al-Masri has requested to join us. Given that he warned us of this threat, his tactical knowledge may prove useful. Rashid turned to Noor, his voice softening. You need not remain if his presence disturbs your peace. Noor straightened her shoulders, meeting Rashid's gaze directly. My comfort is secondary to Al-Jawhar's safety. If he has insights that might protect your people, we should hear them. With a small nod of respect, Rashid ordered Karim brought to the council chamber. When he entered, flanked by guards, Karim's eyes immediately sought Noor, widening slightly at her position of apparent authority beside the king. He offered a formal bow to Rashid before addressing the assembled council. I see preparations are well underway, he observed, his gaze sweeping across the tactical maps. May I ask what strategy you've developed? You may not, Rashid replied coolly. You are here to provide information, not to command our forces or learn our complete defensive plans. A flash of irritation crossed Karim's face, quickly masked by pragmatic acceptance. Of course, Your Majesty. Wise precaution. What would you have me share? Everything you know about their leader, Rashid demanded. His tactics, his weaknesses, his personal motivations. Karim nodded, moving closer to the table but careful to maintain a respectful distance from Noor. His name is Malik Nassar. Once my closest trade partner, now my bitterest enemy. He built his wealth through weapons dealing with the northern kingdoms, always seeking newer, more deadly innovations to sell to desert warlords. And what drove him from ally to enemy? Malik asked, his experienced eyes evaluating Karim skeptically. A slight hesitation. We had a disagreement over certain trade routes. I refused to grant his caravans passage through territories that would have given him access to markets I controlled. In other words, Noor interjected, your greed matched his, and he proved the stronger competitor. Karim's jaw tightened at her assessment. Political realities are rarely so simple, Noor. But yes, essentially, we both sought dominance over the same resources. And now he comes with an army to settle the dispute permanently, Rashid concluded. What drives him specifically toward Al-Jawhar? Mere legends of wealth? Partially, Karim admitted. But Nassar is not motivated by wealth alone. He seeks legacy, to be remembered as the man who discovered and conquered the mythical desert kingdom. The treasures would finance his future campaigns, but the glory of claiming Al-Jawhar is his primary aim. A weakness we can exploit, Issam noted. Men driven by glory often make impulsive decisions. Karim nodded in agreement. Nassar has always been susceptible to flattery and challenges to his courage. He leads from the front, unwilling to appear fearful before his men. As the council continued questioning Karim, Noor observed how differently he carried himself here, deferential, helpful, almost humble. The contrast with the arrogant, dismissive husband she had known was striking. Yet she recognized the calculation behind every response, the careful positioning of himself as indispensable to their defense. Hours passed as battle plans were refined and forces assigned to their positions. Throughout it all, Rashid maintained calm, decisive leadership that inspired confidence even in this dire circumstance. Occasionally, his hand would brush against Noor's, brief moments of contact that somehow conveyed more strength and reassurance than words could express. As the council finally adjourned near dawn, with commanders hurrying to implement their assigned tasks, Rashid asked Karim to remain. When the chamber had emptied, save for the three of them and Rashid's personal guards, the king fixed Karim with an evaluating gaze. "You've provided valuable intelligence," Rashid acknowledged. "Now comes the question of what role you will play in the coming conflict." "I am at your service, Your Majesty," Karim replied with perfect diplomatic smoothness. "My knowledge of Nasar's tactics could be invaluable on the battlefield. Or you could betray us at a critical moment," Noor suggested, her voice calm despite the accusation. "What assurance can you offer that, faced with an opportunity to save yourself by switching allegiance, you would remain loyal to Al-Jawhar?" Karim's eyes met hers directly. "A fair question, given our history. I can offer no guarantee that would satisfy you, Noor. Only this." He turned to Rashid. "I request to fight in the vanguard, where any betrayal would result in my immediate death. Place me where treachery would be not only obvious, but instantly punishable." The offer surprised both Rashid and Noor. It was either the ultimate commitment to redemption or the most cunning deception. With Karim, one could never be entirely certain. "Your request is granted," Rashid decided after a moment's consideration. "You will fight beside my elite guard, under the direct command of Captain Zafir. He has been fully briefed on your history and will not hesitate to act should you show any sign of duplicity." Karim bowed low. "I expect nothing less. May I be dismissed to prepare?" After Rashid nodded his consent and Karim had been escorted out, Noor turned to find the king watching her with an expression of concern. "You should remain within the palace's innermost chambers during the battle," he said softly. "If the worst occurs and our defenses fail, there is a hidden passage that leads to an oasis 3 days' journey south. My most trusted handmaiden will guide you there if necessary." "You speak as if defeat is possible," Noor observed, searching his face. "A wise ruler prepares for all outcomes, even those he intends to prevent at all costs." Rashid took her hands in his touch gentle despite the strength she knew those hands possessed. "I cannot risk losing you, Noor. Not when I have only just found you." The naked emotion in his voice stirred something profound within her, a longing and connection she had never thought to experience after Karim's betrayal. "And I cannot bear the thought of fleeing while you face danger," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "Whatever comes, Rashid, let it find us together." The desert wind carried the distant sounds of battle to the highest tower of Al-Jawhar, where Noor stood watching the conflict unfold on the plains below. Despite Rashid's wishes that she remain in the secure inner palace, she had insisted on witnessing what might determine the future of the kingdom that had become her sanctuary, and perhaps her home. Rashid's strategy had proven brilliant in its execution. The invaders, led by the ambitious Malik Nasar, had approached precisely as predicted, following the path revealed on the ancient map. What they hadn't anticipated was Al-Jawhar's forces emerging from the supposedly sealed eastern passage, flanking their formation with devastating effect. Even from this distance, Noor could see the chaos as Nasar's men struggled to reorient their defenses against enemies appearing where none should have been possible. "Lady Noor," called a soft voice behind her. Jamila, the royal healer, approached with concern etched on her weathered face. "The king left explicit instructions that you should remain within the protected central chambers." "The king left to risk his life for his kingdom," Noor replied without taking her eyes from the distant battle. "I cannot honor his protection while sitting in darkness, unaware of his fate." Jamila moved to stand beside her, her own gaze turning to the conflict below. "He fights with the strength of a man who has found something precious to protect. I have not seen such fire in him since before Queen Layla's passing." The mention of Rashid's first wife sent a pang through Noor's heart, not jealousy, but a deep acknowledgement of the love he had lost and the pain he had carried alone for so many years. "He honors her memory through his courage," she said softly. "And through finding the capacity to love again," Jamila added with gentle directness. "An old woman like me sees what younger eyes sometimes miss. The king's heart has awakened since you arrived, Lady Noor." Before she could respond, a commotion in the battle drew their attention. The eastern flank of Nasar's forces had broken, retreating in disarray under the relentless pressure of Al-Jawhar's cavalry. At their center, Noor could make out the distinctive royal banner that marked Rashid's position, advancing steadily, pushing deeper into enemy lines. He leads from the heart of the battle, Noor observed, pride and fear mingling in her voice. As he always has, Jamila confirmed. Our king believes a ruler who asks men to die for him must be willing to risk death alongside them. As they watched, a sudden shift occurred in the battlefield dynamics. A contingent of enemy soldiers, previously held in reserve, surged forward toward Rashid's position. Their weapons gleamed differently in the sunlight, the firearms Karim had warned about, capable of striking from distances traditional desert weapons could not reach. Noor's breath caught. They're targeting the king. Jamila gripped the stone parapet, her knuckles whitening. May the ancient gods protect him. Through the swirling dust and chaos, Noor strained to follow the royal banner. For several agonizing moments, it disappeared from view, obscured by the press of combat. When it emerged again, it seemed to falter, dipping toward the ground before being raised once more. Something's happened, Noor whispered, her heart constricting with fear. As if in answer to her unspoken dread, a palace messenger appeared at the tower entrance, breathless from his climb. Lady Noor, he called. Your presence is requested in the healing chambers immediately. The king... She didn't wait to hear more, gathering her skirts and rushing past him, descending the spiral staircase with dangerous speed. Behind her, Jamila followed as quickly as her aged legs would permit, calling for her apprentices to prepare the royal healing chamber. The palace corridors blurred around Noor as she ran, her mind filled with terrible possibilities. When she reached the healing chambers, she found them already in frantic activity. Physicians moved with practiced efficiency, preparing herbs, bandages, and surgical instruments. At the center of this controlled chaos stood Captain Zafir, his armor splattered with blood, his expression grim. What happened? Noor demanded, reaching him in 3 swift strides. An ambush, Zafir replied tersely. They had marksmen concealed among their regular troops. One shot came perilously close to the king. How badly is he wounded? The question emerged as barely more than a whisper. Before Zafir could answer, the chamber doors burst open. 4 royal guards entered, carefully bearing a stretcher between them. On it lay Rashid, his face ashen beneath his desert-darkened skin, a hasty field dressing visible on his left shoulder, already soaked with blood. Rashid! Noor moved to his side instantly, taking his hand. His eyes opened at her touch, focusing on her face with evident effort. Noor, he managed, his voice hoarse but stronger than his appearance suggested. You should not be here. There is nowhere else I would be, she replied firmly, squeezing his hand as the physicians began cutting away his blood-soaked garments to access the wound. The battle, he began, attempting to rise before pain forced him back down. Proceeds according to your plan, Captain Zafir assured him quickly. Commander Isam has taken command as instructed. The Eastern Gambit worked perfectly. Nassar's forces are in disarray. A brief smile touched Rashid's lips before fading as the physicians began their work in earnest. Jamila arrived, immediately taking charge of the proceedings with the authority of decades of experience. Lady Noor, we must work quickly, she said, her tone brooking no argument. Please wait in the antechamber. I will call you the moment we've stabilized him. Though every instinct screamed to remain at Rashid's side, Noor recognized the wisdom in Jamila's command. With a final squeeze of his hand and a whispered promise to return soon, she withdrew to the adjacent room, where she found herself not alone as expected. Karim sat on a stone bench against the wall, his own arm bandaged, his face bearing a long cut from temple to jaw. He rose unsteadily as she entered, surprise evident in his expression. Noor, he said, his voice lacking its usual calculated smoothness. Is the king being treated? She cut him off, too overwhelmed with concern for Rashid to maintain diplomatic courtesy. What are you doing here? Karim touched his bandaged arm self-consciously. I took an arrow meant for Captain Zafir. Nothing serious, but the physicians insisted on treatment. He hesitated, seeming to struggle with unfamiliar sincerity. I did not expect to find you here, so close to the king during his moment of vulnerability. Something in his tone made Noor study him more carefully. You're surprised that I care for his well-being? I'm surprised he allows it, Karim clarified. A king in such a position, it suggests he values you far more than merely a rescued desert traveler. Noor chose not to respond directly, unwilling to discuss her relationship with Rashid in front of the man who had once discarded her like unwanted cargo. Instead, she changed the subject abruptly. How goes the battle truly? Captain Zafir would not speak ill of their progress in front of his wounded king. A flash of grudging respect crossed Karim's features. Always perceptive, he acknowledged. The battle hangs in balance. Nasar's men were caught off guard by the eastern attack, but they're regrouping. Their firearms give them significant advantage at distance. And your part in this? Noor asked pointedly. Zafir mentioned you took an arrow for him, a surprisingly heroic act for a man who once left his wife to die in the desert. Karim's gaze dropped momentarily. When he looked up again, there was something in his eyes Noor had never seen before, something that might, in another man, have been shame. People can change, Noor, he said quietly. Or perhaps not change, but see more clearly what they've become. Before she could respond, Jamila appeared in the doorway, her expression cautiously relieved. Lady Noor, the king asks for you. The wound was deep but clean. The bullet passed through without fragmenting. With proper care and rest, he should recover fully. The royal bedchamber was bathed in the warm glow of oil lamps, their gentle light casting elongated shadows across the intricate mosaic floor. 3 days had passed since the battle, and though Rashid's wound was healing well, Jamila had insisted he remain abed to regain his strength. For a man accustomed to constant activity and authority, this forced convalescence had proven almost as challenging as the wound itself. You pace like a caged desert lion, Rashid observed as Noor moved restlessly between the window and his bedside. What troubles you beyond my injury? She paused, turning to face him with a small smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Am I so transparent to you already? Increasingly so, he replied, his deep voice warm with affection. Your thoughts show in your movements as clearly as ripples reveal a stone's path through water. Noor approached his bedside, carefully settling on the edge without disturbing his bandaged shoulder. The closeness between them had deepened during his recovery, the barriers of formality and caution gradually dissolving with each passing day. The victory celebration begins at sunset, she finally said. Your people wish to honor your courage and the defeat of Nasar's forces. And you believe I should attend despite Jamila's protests, Rashid guessed, reaching for her hand. I believe your presence would mean everything to those who fought for you, she corrected gently. Even briefly, they need to see their king standing strong, especially after witnessing you fall in battle. Rashid studied her face thoughtfully. There's more troubling you than my public duties. Noor hesitated, then spoke the truth that had been weighing on her heart. Karim has requested a private audience with you. He awaits your decision on whether he may return to reclaim what remains of his territories, now that Nasar's forces have been decisively defeated. The mention of Karim's name brought a subtle tension to Rashid's features. And you fear what decision I might make regarding his future. I fear what it might mean for mine, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. If you grant him permission to rebuild his power, he may reassert his claim over me as his wife. Rashid's grip on her hand tightened fractionally. That will never happen, Noor. I would sooner renounce my crown than allow him to take you from Al-Jawhar against your will. The fervor in his voice warmed her heart, even as the gravity of his words alarmed her. I would never ask you to choose between your duty to your kingdom and— And what? He interrupted gently. The woman I have come to love. The declaration hung in the air between them, simple yet profound, though she had felt the truth of his affection growing with each passing day. Hearing it stated so plainly left her momentarily speechless. Rashid, she finally managed, her voice thick with emotion. You need not respond, he assured her quickly. I understand that, after what you endured with Karim, trust comes neither easily nor quickly. I merely wish you to know the truth of my heart before I face him. Noor leaned forward, placing her palm against his cheek with tender familiarity. My silence wasn't hesitation, she corrected softly. It was wonder. I never imagined finding such feelings again after believing myself broken beyond repair. The joy that bloomed across Rashid's face transformed him, erasing years of solitude and grief in an instant. With his good arm, he drew her closer, their foreheads touching in an intimate gesture more meaningful than any passionate embrace could have been. "Then we are both healing," he murmured. Their moment of connection was interrupted by a respectful knock. Captain Zafir entered at Rashid's command, bowing deeply. "Forgive the intrusion, Your Majesty. The victory celebration preparations are complete. The people gather in the main square, and the council has requested your presence, even if briefly." Rashid exchanged a glance with Noor, a silent communication passing between them. "Inform the council I shall appear," he decided, "and send word that Lord Al-Masri's audience is granted, immediately following the celebration." As Zafir departed, Noor helped Rashid rise from the bed. His strength had returned considerably in the past days, though he moved with the careful deliberation of a man still recovering from significant injury. "Are you certain you're strong enough for both the celebration and Karim's audience?" Noor asked as she helped him don a formal robe of midnight blue embroidered with silver stars, the traditional garment of Al-Jawhar's ruler during victory celebrations. "For the celebration, perhaps not," Rashid admitted with a wry smile. "But for settling matters with Karim once and for all, I would find strength if I had to rise from my deathbed." The grand plaza of Al-Jawhar blazed with celebratory fires and thousands of hanging lanterns, transforming the night into a glittering reflection of the star-filled sky above. When Rashid appeared on the palace balcony overlooking the gathering, a roar of adoration rose from the assembled citizens. Though he stood for only a few minutes, acknowledging their cheers with dignified waves and expressing brief gratitude for their courage, his appearance had the desired effect. The people saw their king, wounded but unbowed, weakened but undefeated. Noor remained just behind him, watching not just Rashid, but the faces of the people below. Their devotion to their king was evident in every expression, from the weathered features of veteran soldiers to the shining eyes of children hoisted onto parents' shoulders for a better view. This was not mere loyalty to a ruler, but love for a man who had proven himself worthy of their trust. When they returned to the private royal chambers, Karim was already waiting, standing with uncharacteristic humility in the center of the room. He bowed deeply as Rashid entered, his eyes briefly flicking to Noor with an expression she couldn't quite decipher. "Your Majesty honors me with this audience," he began formally. "I come to offer my gratitude for your kingdom's aid in defeating Nasar, and to request your blessing as I return to rebuild what remains of my territories." Rashid settled carefully into his throne-like chair, gesturing for Noor to sit in the adjacent seat, a position normally reserved for the highest royal advisors, a deliberate statement that was not lost on Karim. "Before we discuss your future, Lord Al-Masri," Rashid replied, his voice carrying the full weight of royal authority despite his injury, "we must resolve the matter of your past, specifically your marriage to Lady Noor." Karim's posture stiffened slightly, though his expression remained carefully neutral. "As I have previously stated, our marriage remains legally binding according to the laws of your territories, perhaps," Rashid interrupted smoothly. "But you stand now in Al-Jawhar, where different principles apply. Our most ancient law states that any man who attempts to take the life of his spouse forfeits all rights to that union." "I never directly," Karim began defensively. "Abandonment in the desert without water or protection constitutes attempted murder by our standards," Rashid continued implacably. "The court historians have found multiple precedents in our legal archives. The marriage is dissolved under Al-Jawhar law, effective from the moment Lady Noor entered our protection." Karim's diplomatic mask slipped momentarily, revealing a flash of the calculation and anger beneath. He quickly recovered, offering another bow. "I defer to your Majesty's wisdom in this matter. If Lady Noor wishes freedom from our union, I will not contest it." "Your contestation would be irrelevant," Rashid stated flatly. "The matter is decided, not offered for debate." The desert sunset bathed Al-Jawhar in a golden glow 6 months after the great battle. Life had returned to its peaceful rhythm. Those subtle changes marked the kingdom's evolution. Watchtowers now stood at strategic points along the once hidden approaches, and Rashid had established diplomatic relations with select neighboring territories. No longer would Al-Jawhar rely solely on secrecy for protection. In the royal gardens, Noor walked slowly along the reflecting pools, trailing her fingers through the cool water. Her flowing gown of pale turquoise silk complemented the tranquil surroundings, and the sapphire necklace Rashid had given her caught the fading sunlight. At 37, she carried herself with the quiet confidence of a woman who had faced the worst life could offer and emerged stronger for it. "Deep thoughts for such a beautiful evening," came Rashid's voice from behind her. She turned to find him approaching, his recovery complete. No trace of his injury visible except to those who knew to look for the slight adjustment he had made to his sword belt to accommodate the healed wound. "Reflections on how much has changed," she replied with a smile that illuminated her entire face. "A year ago, I believed my life effectively over. Now?" "Now?" he prompted, coming to stand beside her at the water's edge. "Now I find myself wondering if life truly begins only when we stop fearing its end." Rashid considered her words thoughtfully. "There is wisdom in that. Fear of loss prevents us from fully embracing what we have." He took her hand in his, a gesture that had become natural between them. "What sparked such philosophical musings today?" Noor hesitated, then decided on directness. "News arrived from the Eastern Territories. Karim has remarried, a widow of a merchant prince, apparently with considerable wealth and connections." "Does this trouble you?" Rashid asked carefully, studying her face for any sign of lingering attachment. "Not in the way you might think," she assured him. "I feel nothing for him now, neither hatred nor affection. He has simply become a figure from a past life that no longer defines me." She paused, looking out across the garden. "I hope, for this new wife's sake, that his experiences here changed him truly." "Men like Karim rarely change their nature," Rashid observed. "But perhaps having faced loss and humiliation, he might at least moderate his behavior." "Perhaps," Noor agreed, though her tone suggested skepticism. "In any case, it means the final thread connecting me to that life has been severed." Rashid seemed to gather himself, as if coming to a decision long contemplated. "Then perhaps it is time to speak of new connections," he said, his voice taking on an unusual quality of vulnerability that few besides Noor had ever witnessed. He led her to a marble bench beneath a flowering almond tree, its delicate white blossoms occasionally drifting down around them like scented snow. As they sat, Rashid kept hold of her hand, his thumb tracing small circles against her palm. "When I found you in the desert," he began, "I believed I was saving a stranger's life. I could not have known I was also saving my own soul from the living death I had embraced after losing Layla." His eyes, usually so commanding, now held a question, an uncertainty that made him seem suddenly younger. "Noor, I have watched you rebuild yourself from the broken woman we discovered. Your strength, your wisdom, your compassion, they have awakened in me feelings I thought buried forever." Noor felt her heart quickening, sensing the gravity of what was to come. "I do not ask you to replace what I lost," Rashid continued earnestly. "Layla will always hold a sacred place in my memory, but you have created your own place in my heart, equally powerful, entirely different, completely yours." With graceful movement that belied his warrior's frame, Rashid slipped from the bench to one knee before her, still holding her hand. "Noor Zahira, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife, my queen, my partner in all things until death parts us?" Though she had sensed this moment approaching for weeks, the reality of it still left Noor momentarily speechless. Her free hand rose to her mouth as emotion overwhelmed her carefully maintained composure. Tears sparkled in her eyes, catching the last rays of sunset. "Rashid," she finally managed, her voice thick with feeling. "After Karim, I believed I would never trust again, never love again. You have proven me wonderfully wrong." She took a deep breath, steadying herself. "Yes, with all my heart, yes." Joy transformed Rashid's face as he rose, drawing her to her feet and into his embrace. Their lips met in a kiss that held both tender affection and passionate promise. the perfect balance they had found in their relationship. When they finally parted, Rashid pressed his forehead to hers in the intimate gesture that had become uniquely theirs. "My counsel will be relieved," he admitted with a small laugh. "They've been hinting with increasing lack of subtlety that the kingdom needs a queen." "And what did you tell them?" Noor asked, curious about how he had handled such pressure. "That a queen could not be chosen for political convenience," he replied, his eyes never leaving hers. "That when I married again, it would be for love alone, or not at all." The traditional engagement ceremony took place a week later, followed by a month of kingdom-wide celebrations leading to their wedding day. Unlike her first marriage, which had been a cold business arrangement, Noor found herself genuinely embraced by the people of Al-Jawhar. The kingdom's historians and poets composed songs celebrating her journey from near death in the desert to the throne, what they called the greatest love story ever written in sand and stars. On the morning of their wedding, as handmaidens prepared her in chambers filled with exotic flowers from every corner of the kingdom, Jamila arrived carrying a small wooden box. "A gift," the old healer explained, "not from the king, but from me." She opened the box to reveal a simple bracelet of silver and lapis lazuli. "I made this charm for Queen Layla when she was expecting the child they lost. I've kept it all these years, waiting for the right moment." Noor's eyes widened as she understood the healer's implication. "How did you know?" Jamila smiled knowingly. "I've been treating women for longer than you've been alive, child. The subtle changes in your complexion, the foods you've been avoiding at meals. I suspected. Your reaction confirms it." With gentle reverence, Noor accepted the bracelet. "I haven't told him yet. I wanted to be certain." "The bracelet carries ancient blessings for mother and child," Jamila explained. "Wear it beneath your wedding finery. Tell him when you're ready. He has waited long enough for this happiness. A few more days won't matter." The wedding itself surpassed even the grandest celebrations in Al-Jawhar's long history. Held at sunset in the great courtyard, with thousands of citizens gathering to witness the event, it combined ancient desert traditions with elements from Noor's homeland. Rashid waited for her beneath an arch woven with desert roses and jasmine, looking more handsome than she had ever seen him in royal blue robes embroidered with silver thread. As Noor walked toward him on a carpet of rose petals, wearing a gown of ivory silk that shimmered with pearls and crystal beads, the kingdom held its collective breath. The lost woman from the desert had transformed into their queen, her journey from abandoned wife to beloved ruler, the stuff of legends already being told throughout the land. When their hands joined and they spoke their vows beneath the deepening twilight sky, Noor felt the completion of a circle, from despair to hope, from abandonment to belonging, from emptiness to a love so profound it seemed to illuminate her from within. Later that night, as they stood on the private balcony of the royal suite, watching stars appear one by one in the velvet sky, Noor turned in her husband's embrace. "I have a wedding gift for you," she said softly, placing his hand gently over her abdomen. "One that will arrive in about 7 months." Rashid's expression transformed from confusion to wonder as understanding dawned. "A child?" he whispered, his voice breaking with emotion. "You carry our child?" Noor nodded, tears of joy spilling down her cheeks. "The desert took much from both of us," she said, "but it has returned those losses 100-fold. Falling to his knees before her, Rashid pressed his lips to the silk covering her still flat stomach, his powerful shoulders shaking with silent emotion. When he looked up at her, his face shone with a joy so pure it seemed almost painful in its intensity. "From death in the sands to new life," he said in wonder. "The desert truly does hold the greatest magic of all." Noor pulled him to his feet into an embrace that promised forever. "Not the desert," she corrected gently. "Love. Love is the magic that transformed us both." Under the endless desert stars, their lips met in a kiss that sealed their journey. Two souls who had found each other across impossible odds, their future stretching before them as vast and promising as the kingdom they would rule together.